Hey. Tonight we're going to wander far, far back into a time before Rome wore its crown, before the legions marched and the world bowed to the empire. We're stepping into a land that now sleeps beneath vineyards and forgotten ruins, a place where bronze once sang in the hands of artisans, where soft fires lit stone temples, and where love, war, gods, and poetry lived side by side in the breath of a people the world tried to forget. But tonight, we will remember them. This is not just a story. This is a gentle return, a return to a civilization that vanished from maps, but never from memory. A people who whispered their soul into painted tombs, engraved gold, and half-understood words. A people known as the Etruscans. And tonight, through soft storytelling and tender truth, you and I will walk quietly into their world. We'll hear their laughter in the courtyard, feel the ache of a love that dared too much, and stand at the edge of their twilight, when the stars blinked for them one last time. So, if you enjoy these slow, soul-soothing journeys, please do give this story a like and subscribe to the channel. Lil Nomad, tell me, where are you listening from? Drop a comment with your city, your country, and what time it is right now. Because I love knowing where my peaceful travelers come from now. Wrap yourself in something soft. Breathe in. And as you exhale, feel the present melt away. As we step together into the memory of a vanished world. You're safe. You're home. Let's begin. Between origins and rise, the whispers earlier than Rome carved its dominion into stone. Earlier than its legions thundered across Europe and its emperors dominated from marble thrones. Some other civilization thrived quietly, hopefully inside the hills of vital Italy. Their names are misplaced, their words are shadows. Yet the Etruscans wrapped in thriller and reminiscence, as soon as defined the land that would deliver delivery to an empire. They came earlier than the Roman Republic, long earlier than the Caesars, and that they left in the back of not an empire, but a whisper of fragile presence tucked into tomb partitions, carved into bronze mirrors, and painted into the eternal embrace of fans buried inside the earth. Their story isn't always told through the chronicles of generals or the manifestos of statesmen, but through the ruins of day-by-day existence, through earrings, music, feasts, and flame. The Etruscans were a human being whose legacy became not battle, but wonder. It starts inside the 9th century BCE, in time while writing became scarce and silence reigned over tons of Europe. Inside the land we now name Italy, the early ancestors of the Etruscans started to rise from the tapestry of scattered tribes. We name them the Villanovan human beings, named after a quiet village, close to Bologna, wherein their graves were first discovered. They cremated their lifeless, located their ashes in urns, fashioned like houses tiny clay shelters for the afterlife. These were not barbarians or savages, but architects of transition. Even their funerals were symbolic of structure, belonging, and domesticity. Their lifestyle would evolve, blossom, and shortly spread across the hills and coasts of Etruria, what we realize these days as Tuscany, northern Lazio, and components of Umbria. From this soil rose in human beings the Greeks would name Terranoi, and the Romans would ultimately label them as Etrusi or Etusi. But what did they call themselves? That name, their name, has vanished, taken by time. And so we pay attention to the earth instead. From the buried cities of Tarquinia, Villi, and Volki, archaeologists have unearthed wonders-painted tombs, golden rings, elaborately carved sarcophagi, bronze statues that communicate of both craft and religion. We start to piece collectively their global, though we stay on the out of doors, analyzing their rituals like a person eavesdropping through a closed door. What we do understand is that they had been deeply spiritual, inventive, and remarkably advanced for his or her age. They had been the first in Italy to lay out genuine cities with paved streets and sewage structures, temples and towers. They had been the first to write down the usage of a script adapted from Greek, though their language still undeciphered resists our expertise. Fewer than 24 phrases are fully translated today, notwithstanding thousands of inscriptions. Smile's a haunting thing. To see a language written so boldly, yet stay for all time mutes. However, now and again, even silence tells tales. In a remote section of Cerveteri, a younger archaeologist named Sophia made a discovery that might haunt her for the relaxation of her life. She became handiest 26 while she dug into a collapsed chamber under a wild fig tree. The soil becomes dry, the air musty. What she unearthed became not a treasure, at the least not in the conventional experience. It became a locket, worn and dulled by using time. Bronze, oval, still sealed. Cautiously, reverently, she opened its hand, internal. Etched with a hand as sensitive as breath, become a drawing. A person and a girl, their foreheads touching, eyes closed, hands clasped. Behind them, what appeared to be stylized wings stretched outward like safety or passage. Sophia iced up. In that second, she said later, and it felt as though a person had whispered her name from thousands of years ago. This easy object, no larger than a walnut, spoke louder than any textbook. Its lines have been intimate. There has been no indication of royalty, no names or inscriptions, but it changed into love everlasting, preserved in a symbol, carried into loss of life. She took it again to the museum, in which it changed into, catalogued as artifact 1421B. Yet to Sophia, it changed into more. It changed into a heartbeat. She commenced past referencing pictures and subsequently observed a fresco inside the Tomb of the Shields, much less than a mile away. The same figures have been there to fanatics standing below a winged creature, retaining each other as though time itself could not pry them apart. The resemblance changed into not possible to ignore. Had the locket been a private item crafted in reminiscence of the mural lore? Had the mural been painted in reminiscence of the fanatics? We may by no means recognize, but the proposal changed into clean. Person, in loss of life, had refused to forget. This human tenderness lies at the center of the Etruscan global. Their tombs aren't cold repositories of loss of life, but vibrant echoes of life. In Tarquinia, inside the tomb of the leopards, dancers swing their hands, musicians play flutes, and banquets stretch throughout the partitions in everlasting birthday. Celebration, loss of life, for the Etruscans, changed into no longer a final departure, but a continuation at dinner party with the ancestors. An area in which reminiscence became immortality, not like the awful Hades of the Greeks or the militaristic afterlife of the Romans. The Etruscan underworld changed into completive track. Wine and fanatics reunited in painted pleasure. In many tombs, husbands and better halves are shown reclining together. Facet by way of facet, same in both affection and illustration. No other ancient way of life rendered male and girl so closely bound in loss of life, and possibly in life. This equality becomes no illusion. Etruscan ladies lived with some distance extra freedom than their Greek or Roman opposite numbers. They owned land, attended banquets, had their names engraved on burial urns. They had been athletes, musicians, and likely even rulers. One Etruscan lady, Tanaquil, would cross on to come to be Queen of Rome via marriage. Her skills in prophecy have been legendary. But in regular lifestyles, two Etruscan ladies have been visible and empowered, companions in preference to property. This dynamic becomes so stunning to Greek observers that they wrote about it with disgust, accusing Etruscan ladies of immodesty simply due to the fact they have been seen eating with their husbands. But what the Greeks saw as scandal, the Etruscans lived as love. They lived in cities unfold throughout hilltops and riverbanks. Everyone unbiased, yet tied to a shared language of ritual, structure, and delusion. The cities formed a confederation called the Dodecapolis, the League of 12. Every had its own chief, its own military, its own satisfaction, yet they worshipped the same gods. Tinia, the Skyfather, Uni, his consort, and Tiran, goddess of love. Their temples have been big, richly embellished with terracotta statues, often placed excessive above the surrounding land. Religion permeated every part of lifestyles. Divination became a proper technology. Monks called haruspices examine omens inside the livers of sacrificed animals. Lightning become no longer just climate. Tit becomes verbal exchange from the divine. And yet they have been no longer just mystics or romantics. The Etruscans have been skilled buyers and metalworkers. They had got entry to iron, copper, and gold, and they exported items throughout the Mediterranean. Their craftsmanship becomes well known through Greeks, Phoenicians, and even Egyptians. From ornate bronze mirrors to intricate jewelry, their art meditated no longer just ability, but philosophia, reverence for lifestyles, for splendor, and for stability. Even their coins sparse, as they have been displayed mythic creatures and symbolic electricity. They carved testimonies into steel, sculpted reminiscence into marble, and buried love in clay. But they did now not close. The energy of the Etruscans peaked across the 6th century BCE. Rome, still young and simmering, changed into absorbing ideas, infrastructure, and establishments from its Etruscan pals. The Romans borrowed the entire tea religion, engineering, even the alphabet from the Etruscans. Rome's first kings were Etruscan. The very foundation of Roman civilization rested on Etruscan bones. And yet as Rome grew, the balance tipped. Slowly, metropolis via metropolis, the Etruscans were absorbed, conquered, erased. Via the give-up of the 1st century BCE, their language had vanished from daily use. Their names dwindled. Their gods were folded into Roman pantheons. Their cities became Roman provinces. They did now not fall in flames, they dissolved in echoes. And still, they continued to be. They continued to be in the symmetry of Roman arches, the letters we write tailored from alphabets they preserved, and continue to be in the quiet corners of museums, or in the clasped hands of statues, and in the dusty etchings on bronze mirrors. So they continue to be in Sophia's locket. They continue to be in the dreams of individuals who listen now, not just to words, but to the heartbeat below them. To look at the Etruscans is to stroll through mist, to hear tales sung via stones, to capture glimpses of an international that valued love as Lots' legacy. They were now not perfect. They practiced slavery. They fought wars. They held secrets even from themselves. But they believed in reminiscence and symbols. In the energy of a gesture of two figures drawn collectively, conserving hands below the wings of eternity. In the end, we may additionally in no way recognize what they referred to as themselves. But perhaps, in some deeper truth, they were what we hope to be: creators, fans, dreamers, and dirt that also dares to talk. However, reminiscence isn't simplest, carved into names and myths. Occasionally, it rises with the smoke of each day existence. Baked into the bricks, layered inside the dust, echoed in footsteps throughout worn stones. And so, we move onward, into the heart of the Etruscan world, wherein towns breathed, markets hummed, and existence pulsed via slender alleys, rising like incense in the direction of forgotten gods. Towns do not upward push from nothing. They're born slowly, like bushes in windswept soil grown from roots of hard work, longing, and fire. For the Etruscans, a people whose call still dances at the tongues of ruins and crimson earth, the town turned into not simply a cluster of dwellings. It turned into a soul, a sacred space, a beating heart, included by using stone walls and watched over by using gods. To walk into an Etruscan town to go into a world where an architecture turned into not just utility, turned into ritual, reminiscence, and fable carved into each arch, each street, each doorway. Lengthy before Rome mastered the grid or Greece carved its columns into perfection, the Etruscans had already mapped their towns with precision. From the Tyrrhenian coast inland to the Apennines, also they constructed urban facilities that pulsed with existence, trade, worship, and circle of relatives. Even the most famous of these Viae Tarquinia, Sarveteri, Clusium, and Volci did not sprawl wildly, however, were constructed intentionally, in harmony with nature and the rhythms of the stars, and aligned with sacred guidelines. Gates faced the setting sun or the rising of the moon. Nothing turned into arbitrary. Nothing turned into without, which means to construct a town turned into, for the Etruscans, a sacred act. They believed that each foundation must begin with a rite or ritual traced to divine education. Before a single stone turned into laid, clergymen referred to as augurs stood with staffs on excessive hills, watching the flight of birds. They mapped invisible strains throughout the sky and reflected them at the floor. Those strains, cardo and decumanus, north-south and east-west, might end up the spine of the town, Streets might observe those paths. Temples might align with the heavens. The town might reflect the cosmos. On this feel, each Etruscan town turned into a residing calendar, a compass product of clay and dreams. At the middle, frequently atop a plateau or hill, stood the Acropolis, home to the most important temples. The sanctuaries, the fires that burned for gods and ancestors. Around it spiraled homes, workshops, amphora, crammed storehouses, and cisterns of rain-fed water. The poor and the wealthy lived facet by using facet, their proximity a reminder that each one's soul must one day rest inside the earth, similarly judged. The towns have been constructed of tufa, a volcanic stone plentiful inside the placeender when first quarried, however hardening over the years. With it, they carved arches, walls, and crypts. The earliest towns have been not constructed for eternity. However, over centuries they developed into fortified facilities, many enclosed by using massive shielding walls. Those weren't just boundaries, they have been thresholds between existence and the divine, the civic and the sacred. Veii, one and all the most important Etruscan cities and Rome's sour rival, was located simply 12 miles from the infant Roman nation. It was a marvel of Etruscan ingenuity, perched above the Volcetta River. For hundreds of years, it held back Roman expansion through wood, possibly in Foxy. Its temples, most notably the Temple of Portonaccio, committed to the goddess Minerva, their model of Athena. Minerva stood decorated with elaborate terracotta sculptures. The famed statue of Apollo of Vili, once perched at the temple roof, still radiates divine energy even in its contemporary museum domestic. The Etruscans gave personality to clay, but they made gods from dirt, yet for all their grandeur. These cities had been not cold monuments, they had been full of life. Markets bustled with providers selling olives, wine, perfumes, and iron gear. Youngsters chased goats through slim alleys. Girls, wearing long pleated clothes, carried baskets of figs and spun wool on terraces. Bronze bells chimed from doorways. The scent of smoke from fireplace fires drifted down from rooftops. And among these rhythms of day-by-day life, stories spread out, some forgotten, others buried in legend. There is one tale surpassed down in fragments and reconstructed from tomb murals and whispered tradition. The story of Elni and Avili, two lovers from unique lessons, bound by destiny and separated by walls. Oni was the daughter of a noble family in Clusium. Her father, and justice of the peace, is a client of the arts and a religious follower of the god Tenia. She grew up surrounded by music and scrolls, with dancers performing within the atrium of her domestic and merchants bringing turquoise from faraway islands as gifts for her mother. Avli, on the other hand, was a stonemason's son, raised within the shadow of scaffolds and dirt. His palms had been formed by chisels. He carved lintels and aqueduct spouts. He was quiet, observant, and spoke extra to stones than to men. Their paths crossed when Elni's family commissioned a new fountain within the plaza near the Temple of Uni. Avli was part of the crew selected to carve the basin. For days, Elni watched from her balcony as he labored, the sweat on his brow glinting like silver, his moves rhythmic and unique. He noticed her not with conceitedness, however with interest. She was studying in scroll one afternoon, mouthing the phrases silently to herself, her hands absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her goblet. That photograph stayed with him. They commenced to satisfy in mystery. Under the scaffolding, in the back of the temple gardens, she might bring him figs wrapped in linen, and he might show her a way to shape clay with her palms. He said stars, of old myths, of a life that could never be. Elni once stated, "If I'm married to a Roman merchant, as my father plans, I can write your name into each wall of my coronary heart." Avli only nodded, had no phrases for the sort of love that could stay eternal silence. Their love of path became forbidden. When it became located, Avli became banished. Elni became locked away, promised to a man she might never love. But inside a year, she became dead. Some say from fever, others from grief. Her tomb became found centuries later, untouched by means of looters. On its walls had been painted no longer gods or warriors, but her fountain beside it, a boy with a chisel. It became Elni who had painted it, or who had asked it to be painted, a memory sealed in stone. And in a small crevice inside the tomb, hidden in the back of a fake panel. Archaeologists found a tiny sculpture, a bust of a girl preserving a fig, carved in tufa, unmarked, but unmistakably her. Tales like these are rare. Most Etruscan lives stay nameless, their bones catalogued, their dreams decreased to artifacts. But in these silent echoes, we glimpse the truth. The Etruscans built cities no longer handist for the living, but for the tales the living departs in the back of. They have been no longer architects of empire. They have been architects of emotion, of stability, of space that honored each existence and afterlife. Their city planning, their temple complexes, their sewer structures, these have been no longer unintended. They believed that each human deserved region, meaning, and memory. They carved roads no longer just for change, but for right. Processions walked alongside them closer to temples. Funerals traveled them closer to the necropolis. Enthusiasts fled alongside them closer to fig bushes and stolen hours. As their cities grew, in addition, they bore witness to tension between way of life and exchange, between neighborhood rule, and the looming presence of Rome. The Etruscans have been never fully unified. Each town became fiercely unbiased. And it became this department, more than any Roman sword, that could finally get to the bottom of their global. But whilst Roman impact crept inward, whilst Latin inscriptions began changing Etruscan ones, whilst temples have been rebuilt, in Roman style, the Etruscan soul remained. It remained within the format of the streets, within the shadow of the walls, within the names whispered by means of wind throughout rooftops. To now, many Italian cities, Perugia, Arezzo, or Viato, sit atop Etruscan foundations. Under the present-day roads, historic stones still lie. The Cardo and Decumanus still form motion. The historic wells still bubble. In positive corners, you could discover blocks too heavy for Roman tools, reduced by means of Etruscan fingers, lengthy forgotten. Possibly that is what its manner to stay properly. No longer to triumph over, but to construct something that others will stroll through lengthy when you are dirt. The Etruscans did no longer fade, absolutely. They stay on, in stone, in silence, than the smoke that rises from cities still built on their bones. The Etruscans, for all their cloth richness, left at the back of a mystery a long way greater haunting than gold or tombs. Their language, a tongue that once echoed in marketplaces, prayers, lullabies, and arguments, lies silent, unstated through any living soul. Unlike Latin or Greek, which advanced and located homes in contemporary speech, Etruscan did no longer tour ahead. It remained anchored in time, fossilized on damaged urns and skinny bronze mirrors, and yet it speaks. Each inscription is sort of a sigh across millennia. Call, a farewell, a contract, a blessing. The Etruscans were literate, that they had an alphabet derived from the Greek, and that they used it regularly. But we only partially apprehend it. The surviving vocabulary is small, the grammar largely unknown, and context regularly elusive. It's like seeking to study a love letter with only each fifth phrase seeing the sentiment is there. However, the fullness escapes us. Language is greater than speech. It's far the architecture of thought, the bridge among soul and international, among memory and that means. It binds families, governments, prayers, and lovers, a civilization. Without language leaves at the back of only ruins, whilst a civilization with language leaves at the back of itself. Yet what happens whilst a language disappears? Whilst words once whispered through streets and sung in temples vanish into air, syllable through syllable, what stays? The Etruscans left at the back of a language a full, respiratory, pulsing language. They inscribed it on tombs and mirrors, engraved it into ivory, painted it at the walls of temples, and carved it into stone in strokes sharp and elegant. But today, we apprehend almost none of it. Hundreds of inscriptions continue to be. Masses of words appear time and again. And yet, the means actual, deep, human, that means has dissolved into mystery. The Etruscans left us their voices, but time has stolen the interpretation. This is the tragedy of the Etruscan language. It exists, it survives, but it cannot speak to us, no longer yet, like Latin, which grew into the languages we now speak across continents. Spanish, Italian, French, the Etruscan language has no descendants. It belongs to no acknowledged linguistic own family. It isn't always Indo-European, like Greek or Latin. It's far a loner, an orphan, an isolate. Students name it a non-Italic, pre-Indo-European language. This is to mention, it got here from somewhere older or someplace else totally. Herodotus, the Greek historian, claimed that the Etruscans got here from Lydia in western Anatolia, driven west through famine, sailing across the Aegean to the shores of Italy. Other historic resources believe them to be native to the soil, an Italic people with strange conduct. Contemporary DNA studies advise a complex combination, nearby Italic roots with Mediterranean contact. However, the fact may never be absolutely acknowledged. What we do recognize is that the Etruscans had writing through the 7th century. BCE, centuries earlier than Latin inscriptions began to appear in Rome. Their script became tailored from a Greek alphabet, especially from the Greek investors of Euboea who had settled in southern Italy. And so, their letters are acquainted. We can study them, we can sound them out. But we do no longer recognize what they suggest. Imagine looking at a love letter written in your personal alphabet. You could study everyone. You recognize the grammar. However, the words, they're from a language that has never been spoken in your international. This is the Etruscan puzzle. It's far like being attentive to song you couldn't dance to. It's far like looking at a play in which the actors mouth the traces but make no sound. There are exceptions of direction. We apprehend numbers, names, a few kinship terms, a vel manner, Athena likely manner for the tomb or sacred. We recognize some verbs specially related to funerary customs. From bilingual inscriptions, rare, treasured weave, picked out scattered interpretations. But there may be no Etruscan Rosetta Stone, no key, only fragments waiting. And yet the inscriptions continue to be etched in stone and spirit. Consider the Liber Linteus, the longest Etruscan paragraph ever located, no longer on stone, but on linen. This sacred scroll, nearly 300 words, became no longer found in a tomb or temple, but wrapped round a mummy in Egypt. A girl's body, embalmed through the Nile, protected through words from any other. International. The material had been recycled through investors, exported from Italy to Egypt, used as bandages for the dead. And yet the writing survived. The Liber Linteus speaks of rituals, God's offerings, perhaps a sacred calendar, but nobody is totally sure. We've got the script. We lack the soul. Other inscriptions are shorter, but greater private. Names on bronze mirrors, regularly accompanied through sensitive engravings of delusion. Scenes of lovers, of gods touching fingertips, of weddings and farewells, on one. Replicate a man reaches toward a girl as though to mention goodbye, the phrase mulsu floating above them. We assume it manner beloved, but perhaps it manner don't forget me, or I'm yours. We do no longer recognize. We may never recognize. But the humanity radiates. Even without translation, language is extra than grammar. It's Miles' feeling. It's Miles' rhythm. It's Miles' the curve of a vowel shaped with the aid of a mother calling her toddler. It's Miles' the force of a final word whispered before loss of life. On this manner, the Etruscan language nevertheless lives due to the fact we sense it. Due to the fact we understand that at the back of those carved words was a residing, aching, dreaming human beings. And that they did not write only for ritual, they wrote for romance. One of the most shifting discoveries got here in a tomb outside of Chiusi, an undeniable slab, unremarkable at the beginning look. However, underneath the right mild, carved faintly into the wall, had been names. Side with the aid of side, joined with the aid of a word we cannot translate, Larth and Thanchvel. Pupils guessed the word approach joined, or perhaps all the time. Underneath the names is a simple line drawing, palms touching, not shaking, not praying, just touching. You understand nothing else approximately them. No roles, no titles. Just those who lived, died, and requested to be remembered together, with palms nevertheless achieving across time. These are the moments when history softens, when the bloodless walls of time bend inward and we see something human flickering in the darkish. A younger couple, whose names suppose the whole lot to every, different and nearly nothing to the sector. Nevertheless, held together with the aid of an untranslatable word. Perhaps that is what language is at its middle not sound, not rule, not dictionary, however devotion. The need to be recognized, the urge to attach, and the heartbreak of being forgotten. There's something sacred in the silence of the Etruscan tongue, a haunting presence that echoes through every museum hall, every stone slab. It is demanding situations us, and not to overcome, however, to pay attention, not to decode, however, to honor. It reminds us that not every mystery is supposed to be solved. Some are supposed to be felt. Imagine a female, heaps of years ago, sitting underneath an olive tree, writing a prayer on a strip of linen. She doesn't understand the word for eternity, however she believes in it. She folds the cloth, locations it beside her brother in the tomb, and weeps. She does not understand that centuries later her language will fall silent. However, she writes anyway, since is what language is, a defiance of oblivion, a promise. Perhaps someday we can recognize them. The words, the grammar, the poetry. However, even supposing we don't, the Etruscans have already stated enough. They've advised us they loved, that they named their children. Of rituals forgotten via the residing but remembered via the stones. To recognize the Etruscans, one should abandon the notion that religion become ever just a remember of belief. For them, religion become no longer a passive act, it becomes a steady negotiation with the divine. Lifestyles and loss of life had been a part of a grand cosmic agreement, and the gods had been usually watching. They did no longer simply inhabit temples. They roamed the fields, whispered within the wind, stirred within the entrails of sacrificed animals. The divine become anywhere, and it demanded interest. Their world becomes ruled via signs and symptoms. Lightning moves, flights of birds, styles of smoke. Those had been no longer injuries. They had been divine. Language, the syntax of eternity. The Etruscans studied this language obsessively. They mapped it, codified it, tried to talk it. The Haruspex clergymen, who examined the destiny within the livers of sacrificed. Animals had been respected no longer for their mystery, but for their readability. They had been translators, analyzing the whispers of gods from the blood of beasts. Even the act of constructing a city began with ritual. Earlier than the primary stone become positioned, a sacred trench become dug, referred to as the mondus, a symbolic navel of the arena. Into it had been forged services grains, wine, possibly a drop of blood. It became a manner of asking permission from the gods, an assertion that the human world becomes entering sacred area. And if the gods said no, then nothing may be constructed. Now, not without courting disaster, the Etruscan pantheon turned into complex, tangled like ivy across the oaks of their beliefs. Some deities resemble later Roman gods Tinia, Uni, and Minerva would become Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. However, their original bureaucracy had been stranger, more primal. Tinia turned into now not clearly a skyfather. He turned into a wielder of three, one of a kind. Styles of lightning, each with its very own purpose: caution, punishment, loss of life. Uni turned into no remote matron, however a fierce protectress of ladies and fertility, her rage as robust as her mercy. And Minerva, the goddess of wisdom and conflict, turned into now not born from any god's head. She turned into born from earth and blood and breath. Gods did now not stay on high mountains or in serene heavens. They had been present in fields and fire, in tombs and temples, inside the start pangs of mothers, and the loss of life, rattles of warriors. To stay, most of the Etruscans turned into to stay among gods. And yet, for all their reverence, Etruscan religion did now not offer consolation. There was no promise of paradise, no everlasting reward ready past the veil, the afterlife to them. Turned into now not a launch, it turned into a continuation. A murky mirror of this world, shadowed and odd. Tombs had been constructed now not as graves, however, as homes for the useless. Carved into gentle tufa rock, they mimicked the architecture of lifestyles. Pillars, benches, hearths. Scenes had been painted on their partitions. Dancers, banquets, hunts. These had been now not nostalgic fantasies, they had been preparations. Due to the fact and loss of life, you saved dwelling, In case you had been now not nicely buried if the rites had been incomplete. The rituals ignored you can go back. Now not as a ghost, however, as a stressed soul, a echo. One tomb in Tarquinia tells a story deeper than any inscription. On its partitions, a couple reclines at a banquet. The man smiles. The girl leans near, her palms resting gently on his arm. The appearance now not on the painter or the priest, however at each other as if stuck in a second too intimate for eternity. Possibly, they had been lovers in lifestyles. Possibly they nevertheless had been. This, too, turned into religion. To hold love into the dark, to dine with the useless, to bop under the gaze of unknowable gods. The Etruscans believed that loss of life did now not sever bonds. It tested them. And so they left services now not just for gods, however for those they had cherished. Fragrance and oil for the beautiful. Weapons for the warriors. Brewery, often nevertheless warm from the skin, turned into placed gently inside the cold hands of the departed. Not to beautify, however, to accompany. Due to the fact, what if the useless nevertheless wanted these things? What if love couldn't quit, even in a place wherein no breath stirred? These rituals, arcane, poetic, and often bloody, had been now not mere superstition. They had been expressions of a worldview wherein the entirety turned into alive, the entirety turned into sacred, and the entirety had consequence. There had been no small gestures, no unimportant days. Even a fallen leaf may keep a sign from the gods. And the gods in Flip had been now not constantly kind. There had been darker deities, two scary figures etched onto bronze mirrors and funeral urns. Winged demons, serpent-haired guardians, a fierce being referred to as Vanth, who guided souls into the underworld with a torch in a single hand and a scroll inside the other. Now, not a monster, however, now not merciful both, just vital. Some other Chiron turned into a blue-skinned hammer-wielding psychopomp with a twisted grin. He did now not decide the useless. He enforced their fate. There was no pleading with him. Best obedience. To fashionable eyes, these images can appear ugly. However, to the Etruscans, they had been a part of the sacred equipment of existence. Just as the harvest required the scythe, loss of life required its keeper. Just as lightning cleared the sky, so too did these dark gods clear the soul's course. And inside the quiet moments between these rituals, there was nevertheless splendor. The glint of oil lamps earlier than sunrise. The hush of a temple's inner chamber. A toddler's hand reaching for a charm fashioned like a bird. A girl pressing a kiss to the lid of a cinerary urn. Love turned into everywhere in Etruscan religion now. Not as a sentiment, however, as a pressure. It livelied the rituals. It fashioned the services. It lingered inside the tombs. And in one of the oldest sanctuaries of the Etruscans, nestled in a grove that is lengthy when you consider that lower back to nature, an inscription survives. Its miles slightly visible now, worn through wind and rain. However, in case you trace its curves gently, with reverent palms, it reads something like, "To the only I cherished, and the gods who bore witness, let none neglect, although the stone forgets." A whisper throughout thee awhile. A prayer in bronze and blood. A reality that even time cannot silence. Yet what made the Etruscan soul maximum profound was no longer actually their reverence for gods or their meticulous reading of omens. It was the emotional vulnerability that lay underneath all of it. There's an unquiet sort of desperation in an individuals who stay beneath consistent divine scrutiny. Consider waking every morning and asking no longer just what the day holds, but whether the gods approve of your each step. Whether Anne Crow at the left means pleasure or destroy. Whether your lover's cough is an illness or an SN. In this world, fate was no longer sealed but negotiated. The gods have been powerful, yes, but no longer constantly omniscient. They will be persuaded, soothed, placated, if only you knew how. And so, the Etruscans prayed no longer with reality, but with trembling. Their rituals have been no longer just performance, but plea. It's in this trembling that we start to glimpse something intimately human. The longing no longer to manipulate lifestyles, but to understand it. To understand if your baby will grow vintage, to understand if your harvest will ripen, to understand if your love will closing, or if the gods will thieve it away like in breath in the night. There's no small votive figurine, carved from terracotta, observed in a sanctuary close to VI. It depicts an earl, slender, head bowed. In her outstretched arms, she holds an bundle swaddled infant. The inscription under is sort of eroded, but pupils trust it says. Britannia, a gift that my baby may be spared. Was the child ill? Is he still alive while the figurine was positioned at the altar? We don't understand, but we do understand this. Someone, an Anne 1,500 years in the past, knelt in the dust and begged the skies for mercy. This was no longer superstition, it was love, wearing ritual. It's smooth to lessen historical religion, to spectacle to the blood of sacrifices, the golden idols, the thundering monks. Underneath that noise lies something gentle, pain that has in no way left us. The Etruscans didn't simply want to be blessed, they desired to be seen. They desired their joys and their losses to count number, to echo in the ears of something sizable and divine. The intimacy in their tombs tells this tale extra than any scroll ought to. In the Banditella tomb close to Orvieto, archaeologists observed a small ivory comb tucked underneath an HR's burial shroud. It was worn clean, in all likelihood used for years. No longer an image of popularity, but of reminiscence. Possibly it had once been used by her husband, gently drawing it through her hair earlier than sleep. Or by her daughter, giggling as they prepared for a banquet. Positioned in the tomb, it was no longer intended to impress the gods, it was intended to carry love into the underworld. In Etruscan notion, the afterlife wasn't an award. It was an continuation in journey, frequently lonely. The dead might want their comforts. And comb, and necklace, and cup for wine, and lover's token, no longer as symbols, but as lifelines. Due to the fact in demise, the only things that stayed near have been the things love had touched, and this love was no longer constrained to couples. The Etruscans had a deep sense of familial devotion. Tombs have been frequently multi-generational, whole lineages laid out like a family tree carved in stone. Grandparents beside grandchildren, siblings beside fanatics. The tomb was no longer in solitary prison. It was an house of reminiscence, an area where the bonds of the living ought to nourish the dead. Even the gods they feared have been no longer merciless for cruelty's sake. Charon, together with his blue pores and skin and mallet, was terrifying, but he was no longer evil. He was inevitable. He did no longer punish, he escorted, did no longer select who died, he came only while summoned by fate. Vanth, the winged guide, frequently appeared beside him, torch in hand, illuminating the way. She did no longer smile, but her eyes had been calm. She was no longer a seductress, no longer a banshee, just a companion for the journey, no person ought to avoid. In a few work of art, the dead do no longer appearance afraid. They stroll hand in hand with Vanth, their heads held excessive. A few even smile. Possibly they understood something we've forgotten, that to die isn't to vanish but to journey, and each vacationer deserves a guide. But what happens while love outlives reminiscence? While no offerings are left? While tombs crumble and names fade? The Etruscans appeared to expect this. In lots of tombs, there are inscriptions no longer of names but of prayers. Allow my call be spoken. Allow the gods see me. Keep in mind, it's as if they knew their language might vanish. Their cities crumble, but they was hoping someone at some point might kneel in the ruins and experience them. And right here we are, reading their livers, their votives, their partitions and urns and dust. No longer knowledge everything, but feeling something unmistakable, and pulse underneath the centuries, and warm temperature in the stone. And tale that refuses to stop the nights in historical Tarquinia have been scented with cypress and the ocean's breath. Underneath the darkening sky, in a small home carved into the hillside, a young couple sat by the flickering oil lamp. Her call was Lerthia, his was Velther. She traced the rim of her wine cup with one finger, the alternative hand gently resting on his knee. He watched her in silence. No longer with the lust of recent fanatics, however, the reverent persistence of those who knew they won't have all the time. That morning, Velthor had seen an horrific omen, and flight of birds veered sharply east when they ought to have long passed west. The haruspects, referred to as swiftly to the forum, examined the entrails of an sacrificed lamb and grew fated. Tenya, the sky god, was displeased. Someone's fate was sealed. Larthia knew this too. She didn't trust in doom the way Velthar did. She had constantly laughed at omens, referred to as them worried dreams wearing feathers, but this night her voice was quiet, and her touch lingered longer than common. "I don't want to trust in gods that hurt us," she whispered. "I'm to lose you. I want it to be two age, two time, to something honest. Number. Longer to Anne God's whim." Tay smiled, though it didn't attain his eyes. "Perhaps it's no longer punishment," he stated. "Perhaps the gods don't hate us. Perhaps they just omit us." She tilted her head, stressed. "While we die," he continued, "we go to them. Perhaps they may be just ... lonely." Larthia leaned in and kissed his brow. "Nicely they'll must be. Lonelier for a while longer, due to the fact I'm no longer letting you move." Later that night, because the town settled into sleep and only the cicadas dared talk, Larthia pulled from underneath her mattress and small carved field. Eternal, wrapped in worn linen, was in comb of ivory and bronze. It had been her mom's. Earlier than that, her grandmother's. Etched at the lower back was in single word in vintage Etruscan script. Mexel, which means loved. She pressed it into Velthar's palm. "If the gods name you," she stated, "supply them this. Tell them someone down right here still loves you. And that love is louder than omens." Velthar closed his fingers around it, tears catching the firelight in his eyes. "Then I'll live so long as I'm able to. If I must move, I can look ahead to you." They lay together till sunrise, whispering memories and futures, tracing guarantees throughout every other's pores and skin. And while morning broke and the birds flew west again, Velthar laughed. The gods, it appeared, had modified their minds, or possibly love had modified them. This tale was in no way carved in stone. You received discover it in the ruins or painted at the tomb partitions. But in the lots of combs, rings, cups, and beads observed in Etruscan burials tokens, no longer of wealth, but of bond, this sort of love is everywhere. Quiet, fierce, defiant love, to the Etruscans, was no longer only in mortal pride. It was in divine act, something really worth keeping in demise, really worth speaking aloud to gods, really worth inscribing in clay, buried beneath hills, carried into eternity. In this way, possibly, they have been wiser than we are. Due to the fact to them, love wasn't in a tale you told. It was in a ritual you lived. You need to recognize about the art of the everlasting. Smile, there is a strange peace inside the smile of the dead. Walk via any Etruscan necropolis, and you'll see them stone faces grinning softly via the centuries. They lie on sarcophagi lids, husband and wife carved side by using side, not in worry or affliction, but in serenity, smiling, as though they've simply heard a type of funny story, as though loss of life turned into a mild finishing, or a starting. To modernize it is haunting, to Etruscanize it turned into lovely. Art for them turned into in no way decoration. It turned into memory made seen, belief given shape. They sculpted not to affect, but to hold, to whisper to the destiny, we were here. We lived, we loved. This turned into not a tradition obsessed on war or conquest. It turned into a tradition obsessed on being remembered, via touch, photograph, and fable. Inside the coronary heart of Tarquinia, in its painted tombs deep under the earth, dancers nonetheless bounce throughout the walls. Musicians nonetheless boost their flutes, banquets in no way quit. The human beings here, guys, ladies, even youngsters, are painted with an aliveness that defies the centuries. Reds and blacks and blues swirl in joy throughout stone. Loss of life, to the Etruscans, turned into not darkness. It turned into a transition, when in order that they painted eternity as a festival. There's something nearly defiant on this, the refusal to be grim, the rejection of finality. No greater instance exists than the sarcophagus of the spouses, one of the most iconic artifacts of Etruscan art. A man and a lady lie collectively, side by using side. Their higher are bodies raised as though in communique, their hands prolonged in welcome or in offering. They may be identical, not inside the shadows of every different, but mirrored in popularity, posture, and presence. No Greek or Roman art of the time indicates such intimacy among genders. They may be not mourning. They may be not afraid. They smile. That smile has come to be something of a mystery. Pupils debate its which means, turned into it merely stylistic. A symbolic gesture. Or did it hint at a worldview, noticeably exclusive from the bleak solemnity of their acquaintances? But if you concentrate not with ears, but with feeling, you begin to apprehend this wasn't simply art. It turned into a philosophy, a promise. Lifestyles need to be lived in joy. The loss of life needs to be confronted with grace. That love, especially, endures. A sculptor's touch. A fictional glimpse someplace out of doors of Kara. In a modest hillside workshop, an antique sculptor named Alls pressed his hands gently into clay. The afternoon light filtered via olive branches, heat and gold. Beside him sat his daughter, Then, who had most effective lately, began studying the craft. They were shaping a funerary lid for a younger couple who had died too quickly, taken by using infection simply weeks after their wedding. I want to carve them smiling, Then stated quietly. Alls paused. Why? Because if I misplaced the only I cherished, she answered. Eyes moist. I'd need to. Agree with, we should nonetheless smile collectively someplace. He nodded, then surpassed her the chisel. Her hands trembled as she worked, but the line curved lightly. Lovingly, first across the bride's lips, then the groom's, now not a smile, now not a smirk, just the everlasting smile of peace, a wish, of reminiscence held in stone. After they finished, Alls looked at his daughter with pride. Now they'll in no way be by me, he stated. That they weren't. For centuries they lay underneath earth and olive, surrounded by way of silence but in no way forgotten. Because art, when executed with love, lives longer than flesh. Etruscan art becomes also an archive of intimacy. On their bronze mirrors, women regularly etched scenes from myths but, now not constantly the ones of struggle or conquest. Alternatively, they chose moments of quiet defiance, of fanatics reunited, of goddesses positive. The replicate become now not just vanity, it become mirrored image in each sense, and sacred connection to self, to myth, to femininity. And you said Etruscan women should personal mirrors. They may attend banquets, they may personal land, study omens, and sign their names. Their tales, as soon as laughed off by way of Roman historians, as extra or scandal, had been restudied with cutting-edge eyes. And now, those stone smiles seem now not naive, but revolutionary. So while you next stand before an ancient sculpture or in crumbling tomb wall, and you see that curve of the lips pause, that smile is speaking, it says. We cherished each different, it says. We remembered joy, it says. Even in death, we are nonetheless alive. The Etruscans may additionally have vanished, but they didn't cross silently. They left us their laughter in limestone, their wish in pigment, their philosophy inside the arc of an elf, across time, across dirt, across broken tongues and buried cities. That smile reaches us, inviting us now not to mourn them, but to sign up for the dance. They say that after the Romans ultimately conquered the ultimate of the Etruscan cities, they tore down the temples and raised their personal gods in stone. But some things the Romans should in no way erase. The Etruscan smile persisted. Dick slipped into Roman sculpture, into frescoes, into myth itself. Came the echo that the empire carried with it, unknowingly, an invisible legacy, etched into the very marrow of Italian identification. Even today, that smile reveals its manner into quiet corners of cutting-edge lifestyles. Inside the curve of an ceramic artisan's cup, hand-thrown in a Tuscan village. Inside the laughter of a couple sitting at the worn steps of an ancient Etruscan gate in Volterra. In an infant's handprint pressed into clay all through an college subject ride to Tarquinia. They do now not understand it, but they may be reliving the past. Etruscan art taught the arena that eternity isn't about grand monuments, it's about moments. It's about how you sit beside a person you adore, how you maintain their hand, how you select to do, not forget them, now not in mourning, but in coloration, in motion, in joy. The fanatics of Cerveteri and romantic interlude, there's an antique tale surpassed down in whispers. monks' excursion courses and caretakers inside the necropolis of Cerveteri. They say that long before the sarcophagus of the spouses become uncovered, young fanatics used to satisfy the various tombs before it become a museum, before the arena came to look at. His call become Lurth, the son of a vineyard keeper. Hers become Elenia, daughter of an stonemason, whose family had carved the very steps that led into the tombs. They have been now not nobles, now not monks or scholars, just kids of the land. Bound by way of solar and soil and summer season winds, they met where the olive roots touched stone. There, under the color of an crumbling arch, they spoke inside the antique tongue. She would convey sketches, he would convey figs, and they might sit for hours inside the include of the dead speaking, now not of endings, but of beginnings. Larth had constantly dreamed of being a sculptor, Linnea and painter, but their families had no approach. In order that they met here, in mystery, to exercise, she'd traced the lines of worn frescoes with trembling hands, reading each swirl. He'd run his hands across weathered faces, whispering apologies for each chip inside the stone. One day, Elenia brought along with her a piece of red ochre and a tiny chisel. "You stated the dead must smile," she stated. "So I left one in all my personal." She confirmed to man, corner of a tomb wall bare and forgotten. There, faint but unmistakable, become an A-face. Now not ideal, now not professional, but radiant, it smiled. Years later, after each had surpassed and their tombs misplaced to time, and visitor located that etching and mistook it for ancient. They cataloged it, photographed it, preserved it. It now sits in a gallery titled Unknown Young People, Tarquinia College. They in no way knew it become a love letter, and promise made in ochre. Etruscan artistry past the grave. But now not all of Etruscan art lived in death. Their cities have been alive with craft. Bronze cauldrons, sensitive earrings, ivory combs, all testaments to a people who cared now not pretty much surviving but thriving beautifully. They imported amber from the north, painted with pigments from the east, cast bronze that rivaled something in Athens. Their artisans weren't mere people. They have been storytellers, philosophers in clay and gold. Each replicated vised in myth, base in fable. Even their armor become engraved with legends. Warriors went to struggle wrapped in tales. It's become a tradition where beauty become now not indulgence, become identification. And possibly, that is why they're nonetheless with us. Because art, when born from love now, not ambition, now not conquest, but real love, refuses to die. The logicians lament one of the ultimate Etruscan philosophers, recognized in legend only as Vel Arnth. His real call forgotten becomes stated to have wept the day. The Roman troops entered VI, now not for his lifestyles, now not for the city's fall, but for the incomplete statue he had left at the back of a couple, guffawing collectively, their foreheads touching, hands intertwined. Let them wreck the partitions, he stated, but now, not the smiles. And because the tale is going, he snuck again in, days later, under cover of nighttime, to run as give up the faces, one ultimate time. When the room become rediscovered centuries later. Shattered portions have been located, but one fragment survived intact, and curved pair of lips, nonetheless smiling. So, what is the legacy of Etruscan art? It isn't reputation, now not wealth, now not empire. Smiles the know-how, that beauty can stay for all time, if made with tenderness. That love carved into stone can whisper across time. That even when names are misplaced, the human soul can nonetheless be located in and replicate in a smile. That is the art of the Etruscans. And that is why, even though the arena forgot them, we nonetheless do not forget. Now, not with mourning, but with surprise. We could deep into the tale it got here with silence. But the give-up did now not come with fire. It's the fall under the laurel it crept into Etruria now. Not like an enemy, however, like ivy. Wrapping round stone, tightening till the breath of as soon as sliving tradition became long. Gone. The Etruscans did now not fall in a single night. They faded slowly, painfully, like a reminiscence dissolving in fog. This became no mere conquest. This became erasure. And yet whilst the light dimmed, a few chose to bear in mind. The laurel and the lie to recognize the give-up. One ought to recognize the image of the laurel. The Romans wore it. as a crown of victory. However, it became now not theirs to begin with. The laurel became sacred to the Etruscans, first woven into their rituals, carved into temple beams, pressed into services for Tinia, their god of thunder and fate. Whilst Roman generals paraded via the streets with laurel wreaths, they carried with them stolen symbols. Victory became now not sufficient. They needed to thieve the witch means of triumph itself. Betrayal became deeper than swords. Rome had, as soon as found out from the Etruscans. Their kings had worn Etruscan robes, or architecture mimicked Etruscan paperwork, or augurs traced birds inside the sky simply because the Etruscans taught. However, slowly Rome stopped announcing, "Thank you." They started out announcing they had invented all of it. Chords became rewritten earlier than it became even completed. The cities that whisper via the 4th century BCE, Etruscan cities began to vanish from records, VI, beaten, and swallowed via Rome. Tarquinia slowly Romanized. Clusium, no longer feared. The League of 12 Cities, as soon as a confederation of energy and pleasure, no longer held meetings. No messengers, no alliances, no harmony. However, inside the homes of vintage aristocrats and farmers, inside the tombs and temples and streets, fragments remained. A baby still traced his call on a wax tablet in the Etruscan script, although he might gain knowledge of Latin in school. A mom still whispered Etruscan lullabies, while her son dreamed of being a Roman senator. The language clung to lifestyles, even if unwelcome. The coronary heart of a people does not forestall beating due to the fact a town burns. Velia in Queso. A love amongst ruins in the very last days of Volsinia. Etruscan town poised above a lake like a cussed dream, there lived a younger scribe named Queso and a priestess named Velia. They have been opposites. She believed the old ways might rise once more. It all started copying Latin texts for Roman officers. God. She spoke to the gods. He listened to the senators. But every evening they met atop the wall, wherein the solar became the stone, gold, and silence spoke more than prayers. I fear our Queso regarded down on the lake, calm and countless. Then allow them to do not forget us, in order that they carved their names into the wall. Not in Latin, not for the Romans, but in the historic script curved, beautiful, eternal. When Volsini fell and the Romans dismantled its stone by means of stone, that fragment of wall was misplaced, or in order that they believed. 19th century, a farmer digging for olive roots unearthed a slab, blanketed in moss, cracked by means of time. But when cleaned, 2 names had been found, still legible, Velia Queso, their love. Like their people whispered back, "We have been here." The language silenced by means of the 1st century BCE, no baby spoke Etruscan as their first tongue. It had grown to be a priestly relic, uttered only in ceremonies or inscribed on tombs. Its which means fading. Roman historians mocked it as mysterious and barbarous, yet they preserved fragments, knowing deep down they stood on stolen shoulders. Even Emperor Claudius tried to revive it, writing at 20 quantity records of the Etruscans now tragically misplaced. A Roman, trying to do not forget what his ancestors had forgotten. By means of then, the Etruscans have been ghosts. Beautiful, tricky ghosts. Their blood flowed in Roman veins, their gods renamed, their way of life stripped for components. But that they had misplaced their voice, and a civilization without a voice turns into myth. The very last funeral, there's a legend that in the last years of Etruscan independence, a mystery ceremony was held in the forested hills of Chiusi. Old clergymen in embroidered robes, talking the historic tongue for the last time, accumulated in a sacred grove. They accomplished one very last augury, one very last blessing, one very last farewell. They buried scrolls, relics, and statues in a hidden tomb. "Permit the earth, do not forget," they stated. The people overlook too nowadays. Nobody has found that tomb. But pupils communicate of strange symbols found in the area markings that don't in shape, Latin or Greek. Fragments of a misplaced prayer, not intended for gods, it's intended for us. The load of disappearance to vanish isn't always merely to die. It is to grow to be a shadow in a person else's tale. The Etruscans gave Italy its call. They mapped the stars. They taught Rome the way to rule. and yet they are frequently a footnote in their own lands. But the earth remembers. Knit in every wine glass clinked in Tuscany, in every curved terracotta roof tile, in the flicker of firelight on historic partitions, the Etruscans continue to be, not long past, just hidden, ready to be heard once more. The last nighttime of the competition, there was a nighttime still spoken of in the valleys of Tuscany. When lanterns floated on the waters of Lake Bolsena, the last lake of the gods, it was the competition of Voltimna. As soon as the celebration drew crowds from every nook of Etruria, clergymen sang beneath the stars, maidens danced with ivy in their hair, and warriors laid down swords to toast with honeyed wine. It was not only a competition, it was an announcement. We are alive. This nighttime, the hills have been quiet. Songs faltered. The old melodies, as soon as so joyous, appeared like farewells. Here Velia was there, her ceremonial robes flowing like moonlight, her palms trembling as she lit the very last. Lantern beside her, Queso held a scroll, a translation of a Roman ode, which he hated but had memorized, although I desire, Velia stated softly, we may want to place our memories in a bottle and ship them down the centuries, that a person might locate them, and do not forget who we have been. Queso positioned the scroll beside the lantern and stated not anything. He honestly took her hand. They launched the lantern onto the lake's floor. It drifted slowly, the flame flickering towards the darkish water, carrying their love and sorrow into the nighttime. All round them, others did the equal: farmers, scribes, widows, younger girls, temple elders. Each lantern a coronary heart still beating, each light a resistance. For one brief, defiant nighttime, the lake shimmered with hearth, as if the stars had fallen to say goodbye.
Ow.
Rome's relentless include, it was in no way an outright struggle. Rome did not constantly conquer with swords. It conquered with words, laws, customs. Etruscan cities have been slowly pulled into Roman alliances, first as equals, then as topics, then as memories. Latin have become regulation. Roman roads changed Etruscan paths. Temples have been rededicated, gods renamed, some Etruscans tailored. They rose in Roman society, married into senatorial households. Their names have been Latinized. Others resisted in quieter ways. They buried artifacts beneath floorboards, whispered historic prayers in darkened halls, inscribed tombs in a script nobody alive may want to study, due to the fact forgetting was worse than dying. Still, the tide rose, and the shoreline of Etruscan identification was swallowed. Velia's farewell, the tale of Velia. And Queso ends not with a dying, but with a desire. When Roman forces in the end dismantled Volsini, folks who resisted have been scattered. Velia, excessive priestess of a forgotten god, was supplied sanctuary in Rome by means of a Roman noble who well known her understanding, but she declined. I was born of this soil, she stated. If it is to sleep for all time, I can sleep with it. Queso, torn among love and survival, begged her to head. You may stay, he whispered. Stay for each people. But Velia only smiled. No, I can stay in you. In every phrase you write, in every breath you are taking, wherein my call still lingers. And so she remained at stated climb to the best point in Volsini in the morning. The town fell, her white robes catching the wind like wings. And she knelt, kissed the earth, and disappeared into the mists. Queso lived. He had become a translator in Rome. He raised a Wone family. He advised his youngsters memories of gods with many eyes and temples fabricated from sky. But he in no way stopped writing her call in the margins of each scroll. Velia, Velia, a civilization's afterlife. What stays of the Etruscans isn't always just ruins and relics. It is longing. It is the curve of a pot that when held olive oil surpassed from grandmother to granddaughter. It is the whisper in a Tuscan accessory. The layout of a road in Florence that curves like a Etruscan alley. Superstition surpassed down with no supply. They're saying civilizations die twice, soon as when the last coronary heart stops beating. And once more, when the last man or woman forgets. The Etruscans have not died that 2D dying. Due to the fact we are remembering them now. Due to the fact a person still speaks their call. due to the fact the love of Valia encaseth a love of a people for his or her. A vanished international still flickers like a lantern on darkish water. The very last echo, perhaps the Etruscans knew this would come. Perhaps that's why they built so much beneath the ground. Tombs, caves. Underground temples, as if they had been planting themselves in the soil not to die, but to grow once more one day. And perhaps, just perhaps, the wind that whistles through those historic stones isn't always just wind. Perhaps it is their voice, calling us back below every step we take. There are secrets and techniques buried in silence. The land recollects what we neglect. There are locations inside the world wherein silence speaks louder than towns, wherein the hills breathe with memories too vintage for language. And inside the coronary heart of Italy, below vineyard roots and olive groves, lies such a place and buried kingdom that in no way simply died, handest waited. The Etruscans knew the value of secrecy. They understood that stone ought to maintain what time forgets. And so, when their voices started to vanish, they whispered into the soil, "We're nevertheless right here. You just have to listen." The tomb as a mirror, the Etruscans did no longer see tombs as bloodless locations. They saw them as homes. No longer homes of the useless, but of the dwelling spirit, in continuation and threshold. When encherished one-handed, they weren't erased. They had been genuinely invited right into a deeper room of the House of Time. Interior those tombs, archaeologists have observed murals that seem to respire paintings of dancers mid-spin, banquets alive with tune, fans embracing beneath an unpainted sky. One such tomb, hidden below the hills of Tarquinia, is called the Tomb of the Leopards. On its partitions, two noticed leopards flank a festive scene. Younger women and men recline on couches, pouring wine, smiling. Musicians play the lyre. It's no longer an funeral, it's a celebration. And the visitor of honor is reminiscence itself, Velia's tomb. There is one tomb whose call was long forgotten, till currently. Carved into volcanic rock, sealed with an A-stone slab, hidden at the back of a fake wall, this tomb was observed inside the overdue 20th century, near the ruins of Volsini. Interior, in small clay tablet, inscribed in an almost indecipherable hand. The script bore the mild curves of Etruscan letters, worn but whispering. One call was repeated, Vilia. The relaxation of the tomb was quiet. No treasures, no gold. Just the faint outline of painted vines and single bronze mirror, what students believed to be the base of a ceremonial gown, embroidered with symbols of Voltumna. Was it simply her? No one can say with actuality. However, the mirror bore in faint etching two figures dancing hand in hand. In woman, in a flowing gown, a man with a scroll in his hand. The mirror was laid gently on its face, as if someone had become it far away from the sector. Maybe she did no longer need to be looked at. Maybe she wanted to be imagined. The language beneath our feet, as archaeologists unearthed more tombs across Cerveteri, Tarquinia, Chiusi, and Volki, one pattern emerged. The Etruscans had no longer constructed with fear of death. They had constructed with a stubborn desire and continuity. Names had been etched into partitions and in a script that still resists entire translation. The Etruscan language, stunning and defiant, stands as one of the closing ECU languages without a known spouse and children. This wasn't Latin, it wasn't Greek, it was theirs. Loads of inscriptions, names, offerings, prayers, brief phrases that after carried whole lives. But what do they mean? An woman's call, accompanied by a date? A man's call beside an uncoiled serpent? It's a series of symbols. Fish, tree, eye, solar. Had been they spells? Advantages? Warnings? We don't understand. Yet, isn't that the factor? The civilization ought to pour its soul into the earth, no longer to be fed on by us, but to remind us that knowledge isn't always the handiest way to attach. Now and again, wonder is enough. The grave robbers and the guardians, no longer all who input those tombs include reverence. Over centuries, Etruscan websites have been plundered, stripped of gold, urns, jewelry, and painted tiles. A few artifacts now take a seat in non-public collections, orphaned from their tales. Others have been smuggled via auction houses, sold with whispered provenance. However, the soil recollects. And now a new generation of archaeologists has risen no longer to take, but to give voice. They brush every stone with care, picture every image, catalog every bone. Every excavation isn't always destruction, it's far resurrection. And in those quiet, dusty rooms below the Italian countryside, the Etruscans upward thrust once more. No longer as conquerors, but as storytellers. Quesos echo inside the margins of a vintage Roman villa buried below. Layers of plaster, archaeologists observed in a mosaic floor, unlike some other. It was no longer Roman in style. It bore Etruscan symbols, vines, wolves, dual moons. And in a single corner, an inscription in Latin, small, almost apologetic. Velia amata, non peri. Velia loved, I did no longer perish. There's no way to understand if it was simply Quesos' hand, but it doesn't count number. Due to the fact the echo is enough. Someplace between stone and sky, their story endures. The secrets and techniques hold every year, new tombs are determined. Below shopping centers, below highways, below schoolyards. And toddler trips over an Ann stone in a vineyard. And construction team halts when they strike gentle volcanic rock. And farmer's shovel uncovers painted pottery. The beyond refuses to live buried. Due to the fact the Etruscans weren't trying to hide, they had been ready for us. To dig no longer just into soil but into silent secrets and techniques below the soil and tomb that breathes. There is one chamber in Tarquinia that scholars call the respiration room. No authentic designation, just a feeling. Whilst you input, the temperature shifts. The air grows thick, almost heavy, no longer with dirt but with reminiscence. The ceiling is painted in a deep ochre red, and across it winds a procession of winged figures. Half human, half divine, wearing vases, scrolls, and torches. Before everything glanced, it resembles a funeral. But then you definitely note they're shifting no longer downward, but upward. Their faces are serene, even completely happy. This isn't always descent. It's ascension. Inside the center, a single parent reclines, a woman in robes, eyes half closed, lips parted as if caught mid-breath. On the wall beside her a faint inscription, unzon thus, a word that possibly manners soul in motion. It said the tomb was sealed with a limestone slab carved in a spiralo-Etruscan image of rebirth. Possibly they believed the soul, like the seasons, returns. The kiss inside the Vault 1 tomb, uncovered near Volki in 1984, contained 2 stone sarcophagi facet by facet, their lids sculpted with figures resting in everlasting repose. But those figures had been no longer asleep. They had been fans, a person, one hand on his chest, the alternative accomplishing sideways towards the female, and she, facing him, together with her hand upon his cheek, lips tilted as if for a kiss now not but acquired. Students dubbed it the kiss inside the vault. Evaluation found out they had been buried together, probably inside hours of each other. She became in her early 1940s, he perhaps a few years older. In her hand became a small amulet of carved amber, shaped like a rose. Romantic testimonies circulated of enthusiasts who selected death together, or of a female who demanded to observe her, liked past the veil. But amongst the Etruscans, this gesture had, which means past romance. The kiss became a symbol of breath, of the very last exhale from one soul into any other. Not to mourn but to do not forget. To hold forward the spark. Whispers inside the cavern deep beneath the modern-day town of Cheesy. Nearby employees stumbled upon a cavern sealed with clay and stones. In her have been urns, arranged in a circle, each with a sculpted face at the lid. In contrast to normal urns, those faces wore expressions. Pleasure, sorrow, laughter, worry. Inside the center, a raised platform held a bronze figurine of a female kneeling, palms stretched forward. She had no face. Handiest and clean oval, wherein features have to be. Became she a goddess, a mourner? Or became her clean visage and replicate for us? The cavern's acoustics created a weird phenomenon. Each whisper seemed amplified, as if the room itself breathed on your phrases and exhaled them louder. The archaeologists known as it, the whisper room. Some now agree with it became an end chamber of judgment. Others say it became used for ritual performances, wherein actors wore masks and became the lifeless, giving voice to ancestors. but no one knows for sure. And in that mystery, perhaps, lies the actual magic. Romance of the Earth. We regularly speak of romance as candlelight, as longing glances throughout tables. But there may be a deeper romance inside the international land. Slower, greater, profound courtship. Among people and land, among time and those who dare to, do not forget. The Etruscans did now not simply build towns. They fell in love with the earth. They depended on it with their bodies, their names, their dreams. Each tomb became now not a very last goodbye. It became a love letter folded into the soil. And we folks that now wander with flashlights and brushes and notebooks are the ones finding those letters, unfolding them with trembling palms. And from time to time, if we're very quiet, we feel their warm temperature nevertheless lingering. Even inside the loudest empires, a few truths whisper from the corners. The Romans were master storytellers. They etched their victories in marble, immortalized their emperors in bronze, and bent myth to their will, like blacksmiths shaping iron. But inside the grand epic of Rome, so complete a thunderous triumphs, gods in togas and legions marching across the world, there is, and quiet, continual shadow. Now, not an enemy, no, not an arrival, and determine the Etruscans. The irony is nearly poetic. And those who taught Rome to write, build, govern, and pray, finally erased by using the very infant they raised. However, the traces in no way absolutely vanished. They linger in temples and rituals, inside the curve of an arch, inside the language of regulation, inside the rhythm of power. In case you concentrate closely under the roar of Roman glory, you can nevertheless pay attention. The Etruscans whispering. The king's Rome doesn't talk approximately. Rome, we're told, started out with Romulus the wolf infant, turned town founder. But for almost a century after Romulus, Rome changed into dominated now not by using Romans, but by using kings of Etruscan blood. Tarquinius Priscus, Servius, Tarquinius, Superbus. 3 kings, 3 Etruscans. They built Rome's first awesome stone temples, tired its marshes to create the Roman Forum, and instituted religious rites so particular they, nevertheless, echo in Catholic ceremony today. Servius Tullius, the second Etruscan king, divided Roman society into census classes, the early seeds of political shape. Tarquinius Superbus, the remaining king, constructed the Temple of Jupiter, Optimus, Maximus, on the Capitoline Hill, Rome's religious heart for hundreds of years to come. But while the Romans grew weary of monarchy, they eliminate Tarquin with the founding of the Republic. The king changed into long gone. However, the palace he built remained. So did the throne, now invisible, upon which each Roman emperor could take a seat. The cloak of the augur Roman generals carried in curved personnel called the lituason, sacred image used in rituals to examine the need of the gods. They marked the sky with it, dividing it into quadrants. 2 are searching for omens. It changed into Etruscan. The exercise of augury, watching birds to examine divine favor, changed into imported immediately from Etruria, so changed into haruspicy. Divination, by studying the liver of a sacrificed animal. The very concept that the gods had moods, and that mortals should interpret them through patterns in nature, changed into now not Roman in any respect. While in Roman preferred stood before his troops and declared that Mars desired their task, he changed into wearing the cloak of a augur once worn in Cara or Villi. He changed into an Roman, sure, but his gods spoke Etruscan, veiled temples, silent tongues. By using the primary century BCE, the Etruscan language changed into almost lifeless. Rome's growth had smothered it, now not through brutality, but through absorption. Latin changed into the language of contracts, infantrymen, and memories. It carried the weight of Caesar's decrees and Cicero's speeches. Etruscan, with its strange characters and guttural softness, diminished from public life. But now not from memory. Yeah. Romans nevertheless told ghost memories approximately the tombs of Tarquinia. Senators nevertheless whispered that the Sibylline books, Rome's mystical oracles, were written in Etruscan. And while thunder cracked, priests nevertheless reached for old Etruscan scrolls, the Etrusca Disciplina, to understand what the gods wanted. Even in death, the Etruscans held Rome by using the throat. And girl named Tanaquil changed into a Etruscan queen. Her husband changed into Tarquinius Priscus, the primary Etruscan king of Rome. Legend says she changed into an prophetess, capable of see the destiny inside the flight of birds and in flames. While her husband changed into assassinated, she closed the palace gates, told the human beings he changed into most effective wounded, and established her adopted son Servius Tullius as king. She had no military. It's most effective her voice, most effective her imaginative and prescient. And Rome obeyed. Centuries later, as Rome cast its empire and conquered the sector, the call Tanaquil diminished. She became a shadow and footnote and forgotten queen. But she had written her will into the bones of the town. She confirmed Rome what power gave the impression of now not as brute pressure, but as foresight, persuasion, and foxy. And in that manner, she nevertheless guidelines. Love inside the time of empire most of the scattered ruins near present-day Servitary. There is a mosaic buried inside the ground of what changed into once an rich Roman villa. It indicates a man and a girl reclining on a couch, raising cups to every different, in the beginning look. It looks simply Roman. The style, poses. The grapes inside the background, but one detail marks it as Etruscan in spirit. The girl's call is written beside her, Larthia. Roman mosaics nearly in no way named girls. However, the Etruscans did. They painted wives subsequent to husbands, laughing and ingesting as equals. They buried them side by using side, preserving hands. They inscribed both names on tombs. The mosaic is old, the names are worn. However, the loved endures. At the same time as the empire rose and fell, the quiet dignity of Etruscan romance left its stain in stone. Rome. Enesques that suit too nicely by the point Augustus declared himself the primary emperor of Rome. The Etruscans were long, long gone, their language silenced, their cities annexed, their gods renamed. However, the rituals persevered. The arches they pioneered held up aqueducts. The augurs nevertheless marked the sky. The Senate nevertheless met in buildings modeled after Etruscan layout. Rome wore the face of empire. But underneath it, changed into borrowed masks, and it suit too nicely. Due to the fact the Romans had now not just conquered the Etruscans, they had become them. The Shadow's legacy, the greatest tragedy of the Etruscans, may not be their disappearance. It's far that they were remembered imperfectly, incompletely, and usually in someone else's language. Into now not darkness. It changed into foundation. They were the silent architects of one of the world's greatest civilizations. Now, not as rulers, but as ghosts, loving, guiding, haunting, usually just underneath the surface. They are saying that when you lose your voice, you become a whisper in someone else's story. That's what the Etruscans became in Rome. Not absolutely erased, simply spoken of and beyond demanding. Quoted without credit. Echoed in marble halls in which their approaches. Within the form of Roman roads that observed Etruscan alignments. Within the etiquette of funerals. Within the struggle, trumpets Roman generals raised at the battlefield derived from the Etruscan liturgus, lengthy and curled like a serpent prepared to strike. Rome never preferred to confess what it owed. It preferred the illusion of foundation. Romulus, wolf-suckled, and divine. It slaying his brother to construct a metropolis of destiny. However, beneath the parable, the truth quietly pulsed Etruscan blood had watered Rome's roots. The silent engineers of empire, the Romans, had been high-quality developers. However, they didn't invent the whole lot they constructed, the arch. Etruscan. Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer. First dug with Etruscan know-how of drainage and hydraulics. City-making plans within the early republic, inherited from the Etruscan metropolis nation version. Even the practice of dividing land into squares, a sample that formed Roman colonies throughout Europe, got here from Etruscan augural divisions of the sky and soil. Rome elevated these systems, no question, perfected them, industrialized them. However, the blueprints had been older, sketched first through palms now forgotten, palms that wore bronze rings, that traced smooth curves onto urns, that wrote in a script no person now knows. The Etruscans had not vanished, that they had long passed underground. Like the waters below, Roman streets quiet, critical and flowing still. Whilst the beyond wears a new call, perhaps the greatest robbery was not of land or temples or rituals. It was of identification. Roman mythology is a patchwork duvet stitched with borrowed threads. The god Jupiter, once Tinia; Minerva, once Minerva; Juno, once Uni, the awesome Etruscan mom goddess whose statues watched over Tarquinia with stern, proud eyes. Even the Roman idea of the afterlife, a journey, a reckoning. A destination was formed through Etruscan visions, painted interior tombs lengthy before the Romans wrote down their legal guidelines. But within the retelling, the names modified, the memories bent, the origins faded into the haze of always was. Rome wore the beyond like a gown heavy, resplendent, and secondhand, and the folks who once wove it became ghosts in its folds. A second of reminiscence. Enthusiasts within the dust permits pause, only for a second. Step out of the stone, the maps, the rituals, and step into something softer. In a hillside tomb in Volki, there's a sarcophagus carved with figures, a person and a lady. They lie side through side, observing outward. His hand rests gently on her shoulder, and her eyes are open, calm, eternal, neither smiling nor sorrowful. Simply ... present. Their names are lost, their lives forgotten. However, their love, if that's what this is, survived in sculpture. This isn't Roman. Romans buried their dead differently. Their tombs had been solemn, character detached. This is Etruscan, intimate, identical, human, even in loss of life. They leaned into each other as if to say, we had been right here. We mattered. We cherished. Perhaps that's the truest legacy. Not the rituals or the politics or the art, however, the human truth that endures below it. That once lengthy in the past, in a time half remembered, people lived and died and held each other near. Not emperors, not myths. Simply souls, side through side, as the empire rose round. Their bones, the breath below the marble through the peak of Roman power, the Etruscans, had become an interest. Roman poets known as them mystic and historical, like exceptional plants in a once familiar lawn. Livy mentions them as forebears of Roman greatness. Virgil weaves them into the Aeneid as allies of destiny. However, always they may be beyond demanding. History, scenery. No person requested what they dreamed of, what they feared, who they overlooked whilst the nights were given cold in Cara, or Volterra and Butt. The breath of the Etruscans still moved through the marble colonnades of Rome. Every augur's prayer, every sewer grate, every ceremonial procession, they had been there. Not middle degree. However, below it, preserving it up. A civilization that whispered to say, the Etruscans disappeared as fake. They did not vanish. They became breathless, silenced, folded into some other empire's story. However, like every whispered things, they wait. Within the perspective of a temple's roof, in a Latin word whose root is Etruscan, within the graves we haven't but unearthed, and in us. Because each time we say, Rome, we additionally summon the shadow it stands on. And the whisper will become, ah, call again. All echoes subsequently dim. There comes a moment in every super civilization, no longer when it falls, but when it fades. No longer with fireplace or blood or a enemy's sword raised to the sky, but with silence. For the Etruscans, the give-up did no longer come as in single cataclysm. No Pompeii, no Babylonian sack. No closing stand etched into stone as an alternative. It got here as erasure so mild, so sluggish, it felt like forgetfulness. The names of their kings stopped being written. The tombs, as soon as bursting with painted joy, grew simpler, colder. The language ceased to be spoken. When the closing Etruscan word become whispered, perhaps, among fans watching the sundown over Viet become no longer mourned, become actually no longer remembered. The empire swallowed the tune by the 1st century BCE. Etruria have been absorbed into the Roman bloodstream. Latin have become the language of exchange, of law, of affection. The Etruscan alphabet, derived from Greek, as soon as etched into gold leaves and terracotta, lay abandoned. And so the Etruscans, as soon as proud navigators of the Mediterranean, diviners of destiny, dancers under painted vaults, have become something else, and memory enter someone else's empire. Like in tune the arena as soon as sang but no longer is aware of the words to, closing tombs and misplaced words within the centuries that followed, their cities crumbled into hills, Tarquinia Villiers, Clusium. Grass grew over their streets. Wildflowers unfold over forgotten altars. Farmers dug their fields through antique stone and bone, unaware they walked on ancestral tales. Tombs, hidden deep inside the rock, started to sigh and crack beneath the burden of time. When the Renaissance got here, interest stirred again. Grave robbers first, then pupils. Artifacts flowed out of Italy into Parisian salons and German museums. Peculiar statuettes, bronze mirrors, painted urns with faces too alive to be so antique. And constantly, inscriptions, loads, lots. In an language nobody understood. It's a sour irony. For in human beings so obsessed on destiny with prophecy, with speak to the gods, their very own voice have become unreadable. As if the gods they worshipped had eventually responded, but simplest in riddles. Romance within the ruins, but allow us to no longer give up with silence. To allow us to go back in line for a moment to the residing. Consider in Traveler, and young poet from Florence, say within the 1700s, he finds himself in an hidden Etruscan tomb near Cerveteri, candle in hand. He reads the partitions, no longer with know-how, but with surprise. He sees fans painted in ochre, reclining with wine and joy. He sees chariots, musicians, birds frozen mid-flight. And there, within the stillness, he feels something historical stir inside him. No longer in fact, no longer in date, but a feeling. The Etruscans were no longer myths, no longer shadows, no longer a prelude to Rome. They were human beings. Those who loved, feared, painted their desires on stone. And even though their words are gone, their feelings echo. And every archaeologist who brushes dust from a necklace, and every woman who runs her arms throughout a historical reflect as soon as held by a Etruscan bride, in every child who walks under the museum lighting fixtures and forestalls at an painted urn and whispers, "Who were you?" The echo will no longer give up. The Etruscans do no longer need to return, because they in no way genuinely left. Their blood runs within the veins of Italy's hills. Their artwork sleeps in our museums. Silence calls out to us louder than any empire's boast. And from time to time, simply from time to time, whilst you walk through a antique town square in Tuscany, or watch the solar fall in the back of a stone arch older than Christ, you might hear them. Anne rustle in the olive timber, Anne name in the wind, and whisper below your personal heartbeat. Not in Latin, not in Greek, but in something older, softer, Etruscan. They are saying the useless fade 2 times, as soon as when the breath leaves the body, and once more when the ultimate person says their name. The Etruscans have long passed that second death, and yet surprisingly, they linger, like mist that clings to forgotten valleys, like desires too vivid to overlook. We do not speak their language. We do not recognize the names they whispered to every other below the moonlight. But one way or the other, we nevertheless feel them. In the curve of a bronze replicate, in the calm smile of a painted female from 600 years in the past, in the not possible tenderness of fingers, carved into sarcophagi, husband and spouse, arms interlocked for all time. That isn't always how forgotten human beings are remembered. That is how they endure. The soul of human beings etched in art, the Romans attempted to rewrite the story, to soak up the Etruscans as an abnormal prelude to their personal greatness. But the reality is, the Romans inherited extra than land and temples. They inherited spirit, the Roman obsession with omens, with augury, with divine signs and bird flight and thunder. That turned into Etruscan, the temple rites, the funereal feasts. Even the symbol of authority, the fasces rods bundled with an axe, turned into taken from the Etruscan kings. Rome turned into a super empire, sure, but at the back of its marble mask turned into an older soul. And that soul had bronze pores and skin and almond eyes, and love letter buried in stone stroll. Through the tombs of Cerveteri, Tarquinia, Orvieto, you won't find sermons. You won't find fear. You'll find song, wine, hugs, couples reclining with arms round every other, as if death turned into best and pause among dances. There's a type of radical optimism in that, to face the void and not shiver, but to sing. The Etruscans didn't build pyramids or write epic poems about war. They painted themselves dancing, kissing, feasting with pleasure below. Skies full of birds and mild, not due to the fact they had been naive, but due to the fact they understood something we often overlook, that to be remembered isn't always about being feared, it's about being felt. The archaeologist's prayer, there's in a vintage story, possibly apocryphal, possibly real, of an archaeologist who unearthed an Etruscan tomb and after years of take a look at, sat by myself interior it. No digital camera, no notes, simply silence. He positioned his hand at the painted wall and whispered, "I'm sorry we forgot you, but I promise, we're listening now." Due to the fact perhaps that's all they ever desired, not worship, not tribute, simply to not be by myself, simply to be known. The very last whisper, and so, what are the Etruscans now? Not ghosts, not relics, but echoes with weight, recollections carved in obsidian. They are the eternal question mark in Italy's heart, reminding us that history isn't simply product of emperors and battles, it's product of dancers, fans, mothers braiding their daughters' hair before the ceremonial dinner. The Etruscans believed that when we die, we travel to any other international, guided by means of winged spirits, throughout sea and sky, the event that they had been right in someplace past time, they are looking us now, ready, smiling. Nevertheless, reclining aspect by means of aspect, arms laced collectively, below an unpainted sun. And perhaps, simply perhaps, the purpose we nevertheless search for them is due to the fact. Part of us is trying to move home the quiet below our FT, even now. As trains rush beyond Tuscan hills and motorbikes hum through the vintage roads of Tarquinia, the Etruscans lie below all of it. It's not in torment, not in glory, but in peace. Below each vineyard and olive grove, their bones rest interior painted stone houses of eternity. Their international exists in layers, not simply of soil, but of meaning. Stroll through any Etruscan necropolis, and also you do not feel sorrow. You feel presence, as if the useless aren't long gone. It's as if they're looking, listening, not haunting us, but humming beside us. And the closer you concentrate, the louder they appear. In civilization, like in a poem, other ancient cultures carved their testimonies into monuments so large they defied nature. But the Etruscans, they wrote poems in terracotta. Their beauty turned into observed and intimacy, in the curves of a lover's face, in the elegant arch of a dancer's foot, an insensitive comb tucked right into a tomb beside a young female's remains, in which the Greeks sought perfection and the Romans electricity, the Etruscans whispered warm temperature. They didn't preach to the heavens, they conversed with them. Their gods had been not distant judges, but companions, invited to the ceremonial dinner, presented wine and figs, thanked with flora. And that's what makes their disappearance so abnormal, so haunting. How can a human being so complete of existence, so artistically rich, so spiritually ambitious, simply vanish? The fans who outlasted time allow us to give up, not with kings or battles, but with a person and a female. Their names are lost, buried with them, before Christ ever walked the earth. But we recognize what they gave the look of. They lay collectively on a sarcophagus lid. He reclines, became halfway towards her, eyes gentle. She gazes out, her arm lightly stretched throughout his shoulders, not in desperation, but in peace. There our bodies had been carved 2,500 years in the past, yet their pose feels timeless. They might be us. They are us. And when we study them, when we stare at that unbroken, timeless affection, something ancient and heat stirs in our chest. We understand. That is the reality of the Etruscans. Not their loss, but their love. The Etruscans had been here. They had been here. They lived. They danced. They kissed. They whispered names into the wind and buried their useless with songs. They invented song and mapped stars and performed video games in courtyards long seeing that overgrown. And though time and empire and language have all attempted to erase them, they continue to be, not simply in museums or tombs or gold leaf capsules, but in us. In our hunger to recollect, in our need to find humanity, even in the dirt. In our refusal to let beauty disappear without acknowledgement, an ending that never ends. So we close this bankruptcy not with closure, but with invitation. The Etruscans asked for not anything from us but this, that we stroll slower through vintage cities, that we run our fingers throughout carved stone with care, that we learn how to see not simply the ruins, but the individuals who as soon as known as them home, and that when we inform the story of Italy, we begin not with Rome, but with the mild, comfortable, fantastically mysterious souls who got here before. The Etruscans, not vanished, not forgotten, simply ready, and nevertheless whispering. If we care to concentrate, take one breath with me, gentle and deep. Let it settle for your chest like a historical whisper, the type most effective heard when the arena is sooner or later quiet. We've wandered through forgotten ruins, walked beside shadows of gods, and listened to the language of stone. Maybe tonight you didn't simply hear history, you felt it. In fact, the past never honestly vanishes. It, in reality, waits for a person inclined to pay attention. So if your heart feels a touch fuller, if your mind feels a touch softer, then this second was supposed for you. Now ask yourself for in small, gentle need.
There it is.
Journey with a person who wishes peace, who maybe longs for in tender vicinity to rest tonight. Let's bypass this calm on, one heart at a time. And if you'd want to travel with me once more on quiet, curious nights like this, please just like the video and join Lil Nomad, your tender little sanctuary on this loud global. You are never honestly on my own right here, never honestly forgotten. So tell me in which you're listening from. Your town, your little nook of the night, I read each one, and that I convey you with me inside the next tale. Till then, sleep lightly. Dream of voices carved into clay, of fires that never absolutely die, of the rhythm of an global that one was, and nevertheless is, in whispers. You're cherished, you're seen, you're domestic. Good night, sweet soul, from lilnomadstudio. Ebooks are coming quickly. Stay with us. The link might be inside the bio as soon as it's posted.